The dense air of the savanna 2.4 million years ago vibrates with the expectant silence of death. Not the silence of peace, but of the imminent hunt. Among the twisted acacias, a shadow moves. It's not that of a hungry lion, nor of a furious hippopotamus. It's a silhouette that strangely echoes our own. Its eyes, peering from the darkness, gleam with a primitive yet unmistakable intelligence. An intelligence we recognize. A flicker of fear and determination. She isn't human, but her gaze, that, yes, is just like yours. And now, the hunted becomes the hunter. The rising sun painted the vast savanna with shades of amber and ochre, a spectacle of wild beauty that, for Akina, a female Homo habilis, was merely the prelude to another day of struggle for survival. The scent of damp grass and dry earth hung in the air, mingled with the pungent aroma of distant carrion, a constant reminder of the brutal food chain. The acrid, woody smoke still drifted in the cool morning air. Now hunger propelled them. Stomachs growled with a persistent, painful intensity. The river meant danger, but it was also their only visible hope. She looked at Kale, her offspring, nestled close to her mother, little Akina, whom she protected with a silent, almost instinctual ferocity. Kale's face, though young and innocent, already showed the shadow of the struggle for existence, the worry in his dark eyes. The decision was made. Akina's maternal instinct spoke louder than fear. "Let's go to the river," Akina replied, her voice hoarse but firm, echoing the determination in her eyes. But with caution, in every shadow, an eye waits. With every rustling leaf, a predator may hide. The group began to move, light steps on the dry, cracked earth. Every fiber of their bodies tense, every sense sharpened to the maximum. The sun climbed higher, turning the savanna into a furnace, and with the heat, lethargy overcame some creatures. But danger never slept. With every step, the scent of a predator, perhaps a saber-toothed tiger or a giant hyena, seemed to intensify, drifting on the warm air. They were entering the territory of death, and Akina, with her ancestral wisdom, knew this deeply. And the children, with their large, curious eyes, watched the adults with a silent, almost desperate hope. Akina, with her keen vision that distinguished prey from shadow, scanned the horizon, the plains stretching infinitely beneath the deep blue sky. There were no signs of abundant fruits or roots in the immediate area. The last hunt had been fruitless, and their meat reserves, if a handful of dried scraps could even be called reserves, were dangerously low. The savanna was a generous mother in good times, but a cruel stepmother most often, and now it was showing its most merciless face. The wind, which swayed the long stalks of elephant grass like invisible spears, carried whispers of danger, the distant croak of vultures circling the cloudless sky, the dry snap of branches under unseen paws in the undergrowth. Akina, just over a meter tall with an agile physique, moved with the caution of one who understands every shadow, every sound. Her senses were her first and last line of defense, sharpened by millennia of brutal evolution. Every rustling leaf, every change in the air's scent, was vital information. A group, a dozen individuals, had spent the night camped under the protection of an ancient, eroded rock outcrop, their precarious fires, now reduced to smoking embers, temporarily warding off nocturnal predators. A creak from the nearby rock caught her attention, pulling her from her somber thoughts. It was Theron, the oldest and most experienced male of the group, his face wrinkled and scarred from past battles against giant beasts and, perhaps, against others of his own kind who dared challenge his dominance. His eyes, though tired from the night's vigil, still held a spark of leadership and an ancient intelligence. "Hunger pursues us, Akina," he growled in a series of grunts and hand gestures, the communication rudimentary but effective in its urgency. "We need meat. The antelopes are distant, grazing on the open plains where we have no cover. But perhaps the small deer in the river clearing, The idea was risky, and Akina felt its weight on her shoulders. The clearing was humid and dense, a green labyrinth of shadows and traps, a perfect hiding place for larger felines and treacherous reptiles. Akina felt a chill run down her spine, despite the increasing heat of the sun. The air in the river clearing was more humid and stifling, heavy with the aroma of dense vegetation and stagnant water, a sweet yet putrid scent. The sound of the stream, a constant hypnotic murmur, blended with the incessant hum of insects and the occasional croaking of amphibians hidden in the mud. In the distance, a small group of deer grazed nonchalantly near the riverbank, their heads lowered, oblivious to the danger slowly, silently approaching. Akina could feel adrenaline beginning to course through her veins, blood pounding in her ears. Panic erupted like a silent explosion. The deer bolted in opposite directions, their hooves kicking up damp earth and splashes of water. Akina ran with everything she had, muscles burning, cold air searing her lungs, heart pounding in her chest like a tribal drum. She targeted a young deer that had separated from the herd, her agile legs propelling her forward with surprising speed. The pursuit was brutal, a desperate race for life and food, each step an agonizing effort. The scent of sweat and damp earth was the only aroma she now perceived, a primal mix of exertion and urgency. It was a sight of hope and survival, but also an invitation to risk, a deadly dance between hunter and prey. It was not the sound of a familiar feline, but something deeper, more primal, a sound that seemed to come from forgotten ages. There was no hunger in them, only a cold, almost calculating curiosity, which was more disturbing than any ferocity. Its muscles were tense, ready to strike at any moment, a predator at the peak of its power. The predator's shadow loomed over them, a cruel reminder of their insignificance in the food chain, of how fragile they were. And then the unthinkable happened. The Machaerodus did not advance. It let out a low growl, almost a warning, a sound that did not denote aggression, but rather a strange command. And it slowly backed away, dragging the deer's body into the dense vegetation, disappearing like a ghost. Akina felt a deep shiver. Why did it spare them? What was happening? The answer would come, and it would not be comforting. The mystery of that encounter would torment her, a constant pulse of fear and interrogation in her mind. An immense shadow burst from the dense foliage, faster and more terrifying than anything Akina had ever seen. It was a Machaerodus, one of the most fearsome saber-toothed tigers, its canines sharp as polished daggers, its amber eyes fixed on the deer Akina pursued. The feline attacked the deer with overwhelming ferocity, its muscular mass crushing the animal in an instant. The sound of the impact, of bone snapping, and the deer's cry of pain echoed through the clearing like a death sentence, paralyzing the Homo habilis group in silent terror. Akina felt a knot in her throat, a mixture of terror and bitter frustration. The meat they so desperately needed was now in the mouth of death, lost forever. Her eyes scanned the surrounding area with an almost feverish urgency, searching for any sign of hidden threat, any disturbance in the treacherous harmony of the clearing. She knew that the most dangerous predators were not the loudest. They were the silent ones, those who waited patiently in the shadows. Akina and her group moved stealthily between the dense bush and thick-leaved trees, their bare feet barely making a sound on the damp, soft earth, the layer of dead leaves and humus muffling their steps. Some group members would move to flank the deer, encircling them in a deadly semicircle, while Akina and others would approach from the front, guiding them into the trap. The strategy was simple, but depended on perfect synchronization and explosive speed from each individual. Akina, clutching a sharp stone, skillfully flaked to create a cutting edge, felt the weight of responsibility, the future of Kale and the group in her hands. She could see little Akina, her offspring, watching her with large, anxious eyes, reflecting the anxiety and hope of the moment. The hunt was vital for their survival, and failure was not an option. Hunger was as deadly an enemy as any beast. The vibrant colors of the savanna had given way to a darker palette of deep greens and murky browns, punctuated by patches of light that filtered through the tree canopy, creating a play of light and shadow that both concealed and revealed. The smell of dampness was almost palpable, and the feeling of being enclosed by the dense vegetation intensified the sense of claustrophobia and vulnerability. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, transforming into menacing shapes at the periphery of her vision. Theron, in the lead, his body tense and alert like a coiled spring, signaled them to stop with a quick, decisive gesture. With precise, silent gestures, Theron coordinated the attack. The first movement was the dry snap of a branch under a hunter's foot, and the group of deer raised their heads in alarm, their eyes wide, nostrils flared. Suddenly, a deafening guttural roar ripped through the clearing, making the leaves tremble and birds fly in panic. But Akina's terror intensified when the Macharodus's piercing eyes turned to her. The inexplicable retreat of the Macharodus left Akina and her group in a state of paralyzing shock, a mixture of relief and a deeper, almost supernatural fear. The air in the clearing seemed to have grown heavier, imbued not only with the scent of blood and damp earth. Akina carried Kale in her arms, pressing him tightly against her with protective force, feeling the warmth of his small body and the accelerated beat of his heart against her own. The scare had left them hungry, but hunting was impossible now. Their confidence had been shaken. An unusual gravity began to make more complex, more elaborate gestures than usual. He pointed to the claw marks on the clearing's ground they had seen, then to the river. There was something else, something invisible, something that controlled the beast itself. What could be so powerful as to subdue an apex predator, the king of its domain? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound coming from outside the cave. It wasn't the wind, nor the rustling of leaves, nor the sound of a familiar animal. It was a dragging sound, a heavy, slow step, a sound that evoked a massive presence. Akina's heart pounded, beating erratically. They were not alone. Something was approaching the cave entrance, and the scent of damp earth and a strange, pungent odor, like old moss and raw meat, a smell that seemed to belong to time itself, began to infiltrate the shelter, bringing with it a promise of terror, and then made a hand movement that Akina recognized as the sign for someone else or something strange, something that didn't fit into their understanding of the world. Her eyes widened, and she felt a shiver. "Another?" Akina asked, her voice a little louder than usual, surprise mixed with fear. Theron nodded gravely, his eyes fixed on a spot on the cave floor, as if trying to decipher an ancient enigma, a forgotten legend. He then drew in the dirt the outline of a bipedal creature, similar to them, but larger and more robust, with long arms and a prominent forehead, different from their own. An Australopithecus, perhaps? Or something older, more primitive, a species science had not yet categorized. The image of the Macharodus, its strange hesitation, lingered in her mind like a waking nightmare, an unanswered question that tormented her. But the horror in his eyes was unmistakable, fear a universal language. There was a legend among the ancients, whispered around campfires on full moon nights, about a species that lived in the shadows, that was stronger, faster, but possessed a peculiar, different kind of intelligence. A species that moved like them, upright, but was fundamentally different. More dangerous, they avoided others. Theron made a sign for eyes and peering, and Akina felt a chill that froze her bones. He implied that the Macharodus had retreated not out of compassion, nor satiation, but because it was under the influence of something or someone, watching it, controlling it somehow. Why would such a powerful predator simply turn away? The savannah was merciless, and compassion did not exist in its law, nor in its savage hierarchy. But with an aura of inexplicable terror, a feeling that unseen forces were at play. The interior was damp and cool, with the earthy smell of rock and ancient dust, an aroma that evoked past eras. The cave's dark, irregular stone walls seemed to absorb the light, and the echo of their own breaths created an oppressive, almost claustrophobic atmosphere. It was a refuge, yes, but also a temporary prison, a place to wait for danger to pass. The darkness of the cave mirrored the darkness that was beginning to envelop Akina's mind. The murmur of the stream, once gentle and comforting, now seemed like a menacing whisper, carrying ancient secrets. Theron, his eyes clouded by age and the experience of a brutal life, gestured for them to retreat immediately, his movements hesitant, laden with a fear Akina rarely saw in him, a man who had faced death countless times. Instinct urged them to flee, to move away from that place of death and mystery, from that dark stain on the landscape that had witnessed something inexplicable. The sun was already high, its rays piercing the dense tree canopy, creating a mosaic of light and shadow that seemed to dance with the group's apprehension, each ray of light an interrogation. As they hurried away from the clearing, the sound of branches snapping under their feet seemed too loud in the oppressive silence, each step an echo of the danger they had just avoided. They sought refuge in a small cave, a place they used for temporary shelter during storms or escapes. As the group tried to calm down, chewing on some bitter roots they had found during their escape, Theron, with a worried look, the story Theron began to tell through gestures and grunts was confused and full of gaps. Like fragments of a dream, the revelation was a devastating blow. Akina felt her blood run cold. The Macharotus was not the only threat. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, echoing among the bone piles and rock formations of the valley, like the creaking of Hell's Gates opening. The nauseating smell of the creature filled the air, making every breath an act of revulsion, an effort not to vomit. Akina and her group, paralyzed by terror, watched the dark silhouette emerge from the shadows. This time, there was more than one. Two of them, upright, massive, with those cold, strangely curious eyes that seemed to scan their souls. The smell of decomposition was almost overwhelming there, a sweet and putrid stench that clung to her nostrils. They were not clear images, but sensations, fragments of time and space. Akina recoiled, gasping for breath, her eyes fixed on the black stone, her body trembling with the intensity of the experience. The revelation was overwhelming, a burden for her primitive mind. They were not alone in the world, and there were secrets much deeper than they could imagine, mysteries that had pursued them since the beginning of time. The creatures retreated again, disappearing among the valley's rocks, once more becoming shadows, leaving Akina and her group alone with the piles of bones and the enigmatic black stone. The sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing the valley in a pale light. But Akina knew that the darkness, the true darkness, did not come from the sky, but from the depths of the earth and time. They had seen what they shouldn't have, and now the weight of that knowledge would rest upon them, a dark prophecy for the future. The savannah was still a dangerous place, but now Akina knew that the greatest mystery was not what hunted her, but what watched her. And what the black stone had whispered about water scarcity and the need for migration was the next challenge, a battle looming on the horizon. The future of Homo habilis was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were not alone, and the eyes in the darkness would continue to watch silently from the shadows, their presence a constant whisper in the winds of time. The creatures let out another grunt. This time, it seemed like a sound of recognition, perhaps even approval, as if she had passed a test. They would not harm her. They just wanted her to see, to understand. Akina's fear gave way to a grim and unsettling comprehension. These creatures, the eyes in the darkness, were not predators in the common sense. They were observers, guardians of ancient knowledge who had coexisted with Homo habilis for countless ages, watching their evolution, their struggles, their fears and their weaknesses. And the sacrifices on the altar, they were not for them but to maintain balance, to appease even older and more unspeakable forces that lurked in the depths of the earth and time. Of a distant past, of creatures like her, but different, being observed by the shadows, the eyes in the darkness, beings that existed on the fringe of perception. Of large fires under night skies, of strange and primitive rituals, of animal sacrifices, and perhaps even of others of her own kind. She saw the creature watching her, but not as an immediate threat. She saw the fear in her own eyes, a reflection of the fear she felt now. She saw the struggle, the hunger, the incessant survival. And then she saw the future. Not humanity's distant future, but the immediate future. A change in the landscape, water scarcity, relentless drought, the need for migration. The stone was not a weapon, but a repository, a record, a library of past and future eras. She felt an inexplicable connection to the creature, a dark and silent understanding. They were not enemies, but beings who had coexisted with the darkness for ages, sharing a destiny. The piles of bones seemed to rise like monuments to death, a testament to countless lost lives. In the center of the rock formation, she saw it. A stone. It was not a common stone nor a rock. It was a black stone, smooth and polished, as if it had been worked for ages, with strange carvings on its surface, almost like hieroglyphic symbols or perhaps a cosmic map. She hadn't noticed it before, obscured by the bones and the urgency. The creatures, behind her, let out low grunts, watching her with an intensity that made her shiver. Akina reached out and touched the stone. The surface was cold and strangely vibrant, pulsating with a subtle, ancient energy. The sun, now higher in the gray sky, revealed the texture of their dark, almost rock-like skins, the shape of their muscular bodies, and the apparent lack of fur on their prominent faces, which were smoother and in some ways more unsettling than if they were covered in hair. Their movements were slow and deliberate, almost like a ritual, each step an act of grim purpose. They were not animals. They were something more. They were the eyes in the darkness, the creatures that moved in secret, observing, recording, manipulating. Theron, with a guttural roar of despair and a last flicker of courage, grabbed a crude spear and advanced a few steps, his courage overcoming the overwhelming fear he felt. The other group members, though terrified and trembling uncontrollably, huddled around Akina and the children, forming a small circle of desperate protection. The group exchanged looks of confusion and fear, trying to decipher the meaning behind the creature's gestures. Theron, hesitant, lowered his spear, his eyes fixed on the creatures, his mind working to comprehend the incomprehensible. What did they want? The tension was almost unbearable, the air vibrating with anticipation. Akina, driven by a mixture of terror and a strange, uncontrollable curiosity, decided to take a risk. She took a step forward, holding Kale tightly in her arms, his small body warming her. She knew she needed to understand, for Kale, for her group, for the future of her species. Knowledge was the only weapon against the unknown, against blind terror. It was a desperate defense against the unknown, a last act of resistance. The creatures, however, did not react with immediate aggression. They stopped at a respectful distance observing, and then the larger one, the one Akina had seen in the cave, extended a long arm and gestured towards the rock formation in the center of the valley, the altar of bones. Akina felt a shock. It was not a threat. It was an invitation, or perhaps a demand. Slowly, Akina approached the rock formation, each step an act of courage amidst the fear. The moment her fingers touched the black stone, a vision erupted in her mind, overwhelming and disturbing. The vision lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity, a flash of millennia. Akina felt a wave of relief, but also a deep anguish.